No, I think that's yours.
Is it me?
Yep.
Okay, sure. I can start. That's no problem. But feel free to jump in if you have something to add.
For sure.
Sorry, so we're going to take a really conversational approach to this, so just bear with us. Just not going to move. Okay, so I think for me, Corrine, you mentioned a lot of kind of my approach, which is really founded in intersectionality and how do all of these pieces fit together, and what are the different ways that different professions can start to think about sustainability within their own sphere of influence. And so for me, I'm a practicing planner, a licensed professional planner, and climate has been really important in this profession over the last couple of years, and that's really been growing. So a couple of years ago now, the Canadian Institute of Planners issued a policy statement on climate change policy and practice. And one of the things that is spoken about in that policy document is the ethical obligation of planners to consider climate action, climate resilience at the community level within our practices, and the importance of building that capacity as a profession, making sure that folks have the tools, the resources, the knowledge to do that well. Those types of statements are reiterated in a couple different places. The National Adaptation Strategy, for example, says something quite similar. 70% of relevant professions should be able to do this work, to integrate this work into their profession. They talk about planners, they talk about engineers, they talk about landscape architects, accountants, any number of professions, which just kind of goes to show that this is a conversation about everybody. And I think that's something that I take very, very seriously in my work, because what I'm seeing in the room a lot of the time is that folks aren't necessarily, they don't really know what that means. Like, oh yeah, sure, I care about climate, but what does that actually mean? How do I do that? And so that's been a really big part of my work. So I guess kind of really to kick off the conversation, I think it's important to think about, okay, well, what is my profession, and what does my profession say about this work, and how can I maybe start to ask these questions and kind of seek out resources that are available to me to start to integrate climate and sustainability kind of within the sphere of influence that I have access to. I think maybe I would start there, but I don't.
Yeah. I love that, and it's very true at the post-secondary level as well. So I represent the Canada's largest post-secondary network, which is colleges and institutes and polytechs, and CEGEPs in Quebec. And we've been working for the last 6 years to embed the SDGs outside of their sustainability offices. So sustainability is never going to happen if the only people doing it are the people who have it in their title. It has to be across the institution. So these are the 17, in case some of you aren't familiar with all of them. And an interesting concrete example, just to share how this can work, is, for example, sports. So all of our colleges and institutes, and I'm sure all universities have sports teams, they have phys ed departments who don't necessarily think of themselves as sustainability people or SDG people, and yet we've had some really great examples of phys ed departments, taking action on these goals, looking at these and going, how can we lower our footprint of our choices as a team, for example. How do we get around? How do we choose to get to tournaments? Do we calculate our GHG footprint and then we can offset them? And so one of our colleges at Dawson College in Montreal, they calculated all the carbon footprint for all of their sports teams' travel, and then they've planted trees and done other projects, and they actually started a new course at Dawson College in the phys ed department, which involves essentially landscaping and planting trees. But it's physical activity. And they were so oversubscribed, they had to shut the course down because everybody wanted to take it. So, everybody has a role, and it is and that's the beauty of the SDGs, is every one of them is connected to another one. And it's important that no matter what you may say, oh, well, I'm passionate about EDI, so reducing inequalities. But we know, I'm sure as planners, how critically important it is to integrate, to remember the most vulnerable people in any community or city, and how is climate change going to impact them disproportionately.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really great example, and just kind of one other quick thing that I can add. That's such a wonderful project, but surely somebody had to start somewhere. Somebody had the knowledge and the skills and the competencies to be able to know what was needed and know what could be done and champion that work. And that kind of is, I think, is a fundamental precursor, right? And so there's a lot of really great work going on, helping people to build those foundational skills. So a good example that I can offer maybe before we move on is with the Climate Risk Institute. So recently I've been asked to contribute to a project that is broken up into a number of subsectors where different professionals from different kind of like registered professions are being asked to start to have this dialogue about like what are the competencies? If somebody's going to lead a project like this, what do they need to know? What are the core skills? What do they need to be able to do that work well? And how do we build that into the competency framework of these specific professions, so that whether you're a new professional just getting accredited in your specific discipline, or maybe you are a more seasoned professional who is kind of doing your, like your CPL, your continuous professional learning, like whatever scale you're at, wherever you are, how can we help you build those competencies? And I think it's really cool that people are starting to say, hey, this needs to be part of everyone's educational foundation. Everybody should have these competencies regardless of what profession you're looking at the world through. And I think that that's really interesting and really important.
Yeah, and that's the exciting work that's happening at our level where, for example, I'll give an example of one of many of our colleges. This is our network across the country. Humber College, or Polytechnic as they now are in Toronto, they redid their learning outcomes, their institutional learning outcomes just before COVID, and they integrated sustainability as one of the Humber learning outcomes. And the commitment is that every single student, doesn't matter what they study, they're going to learn about sustainability, but also about the SDGs, because 50 of our members have signed the SDG Accord, which is a global accord for post-secondary education institutions. I'm very proud to say that in Canada, the vast majority of signatories are members of our association. And what they do is they commit to embedding the SDGs across all of their programming. And sustainability from an environmental perspective is just one aspect of sustainability. Mm-hmm. And that's what the SDGs remind us all the time, is that we need to think cross multidisciplinary, intersectional ways. And that's what many of our members are doing in integrating it, so that those young professionals come out already knowing. Mm-hmm. And then they can do their further education. Mm-hmm. And for those who didn't get it at your university or your college or your polytechnic, then you go and you get it through your professional work.
Yeah, absolutely.
It sounds like there's been a lot of education around it really happening, and some really great positive success stories. So I have to, of course, ask the question from the other end of it now, which is, so there must have been some pretty significant challenges that have been encountered along the way. Do you have any strategies or tools that you can share with us about how that was addressed?
Well, I think I'm very fortunate to be in a sector where they really, so the way the SDGs came to our sector is we did some, in 2017, there was a series of consultations with the presidents of colleges and polytechnics and CEGEPs where they were introduced to the SDG framework. And it was before my time, but apparently they kind of looked at them and said, that's why colleges were established. We were established to reduce poverty and create decent work and contribute to good health and contribute to equality, right, and access. So there was no challenge there. I would say the challenge has come, like it does everywhere, is competing priorities. Oh, you want me to do the, EDI, or you want me to focus on climate action, or you want me to, we're very committed to reconciliation. And some people said, well, we're already doing reconciliation. We don't understand where the SDGs come in. But in fact, I have a slide of it later, which will show you that those 17 goals are applicable to everything that you do. There's no need to say, oh, I'd rather, or we think something's more important. They're already in there. But there was I think the challenge came in the sort of awareness raising, so people could understand what this framework was. And the fact that it comes from the United Nations, and the fact that everyone around the world, I mean, I've had the chance to do a bit of traveling in other countries, and they're all working on these goals. And the students in Canada are super excited to know they're working on something that others, because sometimes in our world, we feel a bit isolated, like we're the only ones doing this. And it's really empowering for people to know that others are doing it too.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the limited awareness piece and kind of the competing priorities piece are really important parts of that conversations, and are certainly limiting factors in the public sector as well. It's something I see a lot, and I guess one of the biggest learnings, one of the biggest takeaways for me in terms of overcoming that is starting to think about like who's on the other side of the table and where are they at? Like, what's their story? What do they care about? And how can you start to work on framing these things in a way that you're speaking the same language? So, for example, I mean, a lot of my work is in climate work, right? I do a lot of local level climate adaptation. That's not always like the top priority for government. Like, speaking very frankly, we care a lot, I'm sure, across the country. We're seeing priorities related to housing. We have a housing crisis, we have an affordability crisis, we have a cost of living crisis, a healthcare crisis. Like, all of these like intersectional crises really can kind of tend to take the forefront. And so I urge folks to think about how do these pieces fit together, because once you start to think about it from that intersectional lens, how climate is a housing issue. How are we building our homes? Are we building them with kind of embodied carbon in mind? Are we using good materials? Are we building them? Are we thinking about the how and the what and the why? Are you putting a home in a place where it's going to be at risk of extreme flooding, of wildfires, of sea level rise, whatever the kind of most pertinent climate risks are in your neighborhood? Are you thinking about that when you're building new housing? These are very related. Healthcare, are you, like, healthcare is a climate issue. Are you, people being exposed to extreme heat? Do they have adequate places to shelter from extreme heat? Are people being exposed to polluted floodwater during an evacuation event, right? Like, these are healthcare issues. So these things are connected, and how do we have that conversation about kind of framing it in a way that the person on the other side of the table can start to kind of come and understand those interconnections? That's been really important in my work so far.
I totally agree with you, and I love how that you talked about having a common language or vocabulary, and that's one of the biggest assets that we found with working with the SDGs, is that if you're in healthcare, you might think, oh, those climate people, right? All they care about is trees, and it's not true. And except for trees are a classic example of they provide shade, they provide biodiversity, they provide nature services, carbon sinks, and so on. So surely you can all agree on the value of trees. And if you use something like the SDGs, people are like, well, I believe in, I mean, if you're in healthcare, good health and well-being, you're like, oh, number 3 is my thing, right? Well, yeah, but how much of it is related to, number 11, sustainable cities and communities and where you build your homes? And a really concrete example is one of our members, the Saskatchewan Indian Institute of Technology. They are running a program, an educational program about housing in First Nations communities, but they're looking at it as net zero housing. So we're such intersectionality right there, right? We're looking at, we know there's a crisis. There has been a housing crisis with First Nations communities forever, that didn't really rise to the top until we were affected, people like us. Now we have a housing crisis. But they're looking at how do you build healthy, because there's a big issue with mold and other issues in the substandard housing, so health. How do you build it net zero? How do you build it resilient? Yeah. And in the case of SIIT, how do you teach Indigenous tradespeople to build those homes in that way? And so, yeah, I think it really is important to look at things from all of those angles. And the SDGs just allow you to, you can say, I believe in these, and it situates you, like, who could be against them? But it brings you, it brings those of us whose passion is climate change into a space where we can really communicate with people who don't see that as the number one thing, but who agree altogether that all of these are important for human beings.
Yeah, absolutely.
And just to, if I can just say, like, this slide is just to show you that even within the SDGs embedded with them, like I noticed in the slide, many of you, claim number 13 as your thing, which is my thing. But if you look at the slides, I mean, quality education is SDG 4, but within it, it's calling on learners to acquire the knowledge and skills needed to promote sustainable development. So that's what we see happening in our sector. I would be remiss if I didn't mention 2 concrete examples. And I believe that maybe the dean of the school, the new School of Climate Action at Mohawk College, I don't know if you're in the room, Amanda, I can't see you, but there she is, yay! So shout out to Mohawk College for launching the country's first School of Climate Action. Right? College of the North Atlantic. Again, I don't know whether Judy's in the room, but there she is. They've launched a School of Sustainable Development. This is where we need to be going, right? And these are practical programs. There's great programs at universities, for sure, but within our sector, the technical and vocational sector, our members are developing diploma programs and degree programs to get people out in the field, and they're responding to that. So that's kind of the strength of this framework, is it makes you think about something you maybe didn't think about before.
I have a lot of questions, so I'm going to focus. I got to ask about cost, though. I mean, is cost one of those challenges that comes up a lot of times? It sounds like you're in competition between whether it's DEI or whether it's other environmental programs. How costly are SDG programs?
They're not costly at all. In the sense that, like when Humber College decided, and others as well, to integrate them into their learning outcomes, they were doing a whole process to review them, as all educational institutions review their programs on a regular basis, and they just chose this as a priority. It would be like saying, well, I don't know, like it can be costly if you do something, I don't know, I mean, I would ask my colleagues from College of the North Atlantic and Mohawk College, is it expensive to start a new school? Well, sort of, but at the same time, they expect to have enrollment. Right. And the students who enroll will be paying for that. I mean, just like at some point it was expensive to start an engineering program. Sure. You know, I don't think cost has been it's more about competing priorities, and it's more about awareness than it is about cost.
Okay.
I think there's
Workforce needs?
Workforce, part of the reason that we're launching this school is the workforce.
Yeah.
Right?
Absolutely.
I guess a couple things that I can add. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry, just on the cost point, like, is there much in these programs about like cost benefit to industry? Because I feel like that's something that's lacking. It's like, even if they have sustainable values, at the end of the day, like the owner's going to care more about like dollar and cents and like payback period and ROI. So is there is there education on that you're aware of through SDGs, or?
In terms of the value to business?
Yeah, like why should they do it in terms of?
Right. Well, it's interesting, actually. So there is an organization in Canada called Global Compact Canada, which is the private sector organization. It's a UN regional organization for Canada where the private sector can get engaged on the SDGs. And essentially, I would say almost all the major Canadian companies are part of this global effort, and they actually do see it contributing directly to their bottom line. But it may not be the day after tomorrow. We hear about the green economy and the massive amount of new employment opportunities, jobs, and growth that can happen in the green economy, and many in the private sector, unfortunately more the new startups than maybe some of the older ones, but they see, because consumers are looking for that. And like this slide, I just saw this in a webinar with the University at Buffalo that we hosted 2 days ago, and they shared this slide. It's a US slide, but I'm sure it must be the same for Canada, if not even better statistics, right? That workers are really looking for. So maybe it doesn't improve your bottom line, but if you can't recruit people or you can't keep people because they want to be working, in the previous slide, I find really the previous 2 slides, those of us who are, myself, a little bit older, hiring millennials and Gen Z, and we're seeing it that my own kids are like refusing to go to work for some place that doesn't align with their values, and they're choosing their educational institution based on their values. So these are the future workers, and the other slide showed us that the workers of today are already saying this is a concern, and these are the people who are still in education, and they are saying that they are increasingly likely to turn down work. So there is that aspect of the bottom line. I can only speak to the workforce side. I'm not a business person, but.
Well, you said something in there that I really want to latch onto for a second, and that is that the ROI is not necessarily tomorrow. Yeah. And a really good example of that is like in green buildings, for example. So sometimes your capital expenditures, depending on your design decisions, might be a little bit more expensive at the beginning. That's coming down, like we're approaching parity as we get more comfortable with these technologies, but it does tend to be still a little bit more expensive at the beginning. But when you look at the life cycle of that building, and the cost savings are really important to be communicating. If you have a really energy efficient building, if you have a building that is using very energy efficient heating and cooling, and if all of those systems are saving you money in the long run, that's a really important part of that business case. And that building that business case is one of those competencies that I talked about earlier. Being able to understand what are the costs and the benefits, what does this look like over the life cycle of whatever it is that we're talking about, whether it's a building, whether it's a piece of infrastructure, whether it is a school program, an educational program, understanding kind of what does that look like over the expected duration of that thing is a really important part of building that business case. I come from the adaptation sector, right? And so one of the parts of building the business case in our sector is like kind of what is commonly coined as the cost of doing nothing. Mm-hmm. If we do nothing, if we do not respond to adaptation, if we choose to ignore this and pretend that it's not happening, the costs of dealing with this later, of dealing with those catastrophic losses, is immense and can't be ignored when it comes to kind of building that business case.
That's totally what I was getting at. Because I know the payback, like I know it does pay back, but it might take 5 years, right? Whereas like a board of directors, they care about like the CapEx budget on that given day. So I'm just like wondering, how do you convince those people? Because like they care about their like shareholder immediate value, right? Like,
So it's like asking like buy-in from leadership in a way.
yeah, like is there a kind of like education in that space? Yeah.
Well, I mean,
Or do you think it's more the individuals coming in that are going to have the bigger influence, like larger?
It's a good question, and I really do think that it comes down to us as individuals, as champions for this work, whatever work you're working in, whatever sector you're in. Do you have kind of the language and the skills and the kind of like the knowledge to be able to competently explain to somebody why they should care about this? Like, do you have what you need to be able to communicate? Yes, I understand that this is impacting your capex this year, but like let's look at it over the next 5 years, over the next 10 years, over the next 30 years, and being able to explain to shareholders why that's in their financial best interest. That's a really important skill to develop over time, for sure.
Absolutely. And the thing that was interesting in that webinar from the University at Buffalo is some of the slides I shared, like these and others, were what they used to convince their leadership. Now, it's a different business model because their business model is getting students in the door. So obviously it's a different thing. But even for the facilities, their vice president of facilities, who was able to be convinced and then convince her president that the cost savings were so dramatic, and because they got started quite a few years ago, they were able to show us slides with massive cost savings. And so what you would do if you're another post-secondary, my area of expertise, is you point to their numbers and you go, it doesn't, like, here's what's happened when somebody did this 5 years ago, and look at now, their operating expenses are significantly lower than yours. In Canada, we also have a huge deferred maintenance problem. I don't know if that's the case in the US, and I think it's probably municipal as well as in the institutional sector. But as you are dealing with buildings that are old, they're the 60s and the 70s, the cost efficiencies will come by retrofitting closer to net zero, and you're going to save a lot of money. But yeah, it's all about how you position yourself, and it's not going to be about cost savings today, but you have to be able to speak the language, and you have to convince them to be a little bit visionary, and we all say that's what we want. So we need to push people to think about what it's going to look like in 5 years.
Okay. That's a good transition, actually. So I was going to ask the question, how can organizations integrate SDGs while balancing short-term goals with that long-term sustainability? So we were touching that a little bit. I think Claire was mentioning the long-term, and we've certainly talked about that now. Let's dig a little deeper.
Well, that's exactly the slide I wanted to show you. This is the annual report for Assiniboine Community College in Brandon, Ontario. And they decided to, they signed the SDG Accord, and they decided to understand how these 17 goals fit with what they're doing. And you could do this, and private sector organizations have done this, hospitals have done this, and in this case, it's an example of a college. And you could just look at, so these are some of the standard things that they would report on anyways in their annual report to their stakeholders. And they simply looked at, well, how does this intersect? And they're like, wow, it intersects everywhere. This is the second page of their oh, sorry, there's the first page, right? So their community, they look at their graduation rates, they look at the economic impact on their region. They look at how they are providing visionary leadership in their communities. They just use the SDG lens. Did it cost them more? No, didn't cost them more. And speaking with the woman, the director of strategy there, she said, Judi, in all my years at Assiniboine, really, you publish the annual report, nobody ever reaches out with questions. Oh my gosh, I've had more questions about these 2 pages in this report than I've had in the previous 10 that I've worked on. People resonate with this, people are reaching out to us, we're getting new partners and new funders coming to our institution because they're reading this and going, okay, this resonates, I get this. It's not just, oh, we have sponsorship, oh, we have scholarships. It connects to EDI, it connects to the economy, it connects to climate change. So it really, by the very nature of these goals, they really can and should fit into anything that anyone is doing.
For sure, and I guess kind of another example from my work in the policy space is kind of some of the climate planning work that the government of Nova Scotia is doing. I am not here to speak on behalf of them, but I do think that it's a really interesting example that I can share with you. So Nova Scotia's climate plan has 68 actions, and it's been going, it's in its 3rd year of implementation, and one of the key tenets of its success has been its whole of government approach. So we have 13 partner departments who came on board and said, yes, we want to do this together. And so what that allowed us to do was have climate practitioners and sector-specific subject matter experts in the room together to say, how can we move this forward at the same time? So that means we're talking about infrastructure, we're talking about energy, we're talking about equity, we're talking about workforce development, and how all of those pieces fit into our overarching climate strategy. And that allowed us to do some really cool things about when it comes to balancing the short term and the long term. From the short term, really starting those conversations about buy-in, or saying what are you working on right now? What are you already doing that could maybe fit within this mandate? And how can we help you move that forward? How can we help you wrap that up and see success, add value, and impact? And that really kind of created space for that partnership in the short term when there's that kind of recognition that, hey, when we work together, we can kind of start to see some of those short-term priorities come to fruition. And that opened the door to considerable long-term impact when we say, okay, on the 5-year planning horizon for this policy tool, let's move beyond than here and now. Let's move beyond your short-term priorities and what could this look like if we continue to build this partnership? What do you need? What are you anticipating with respect to the intersectionality between climate and whatever sector it is that you're working in? And that allowed us to create some considerable momentum in Nova Scotia with those partner departments, and it's really due to kind of that very deeply collaborative approach and that balance of the short-term priorities and the long-term vision.
That's an amazing example, and we have the same examples within our sector where different departments didn't think they had anything in common, and using this sort of framework that makes you realize, really what you're speaking about is what the SDGs say, is that you can't do climate action in isolation from health and from equity and from poverty and from hunger, and all of these things are interconnected. And now departments that never worked together, that never saw the commonalities, are working together. And at the end of the day, it's a more efficient and effective way to work. You actually can spend less money to accomplish the same goal by working together to accomplish your goal. And you get more buy-in too, because everybody, so instead of the climate folks, sometimes people have been known to roll their eyes when they see me coming, but now less so, because now it's like you said, how can I contribute to your objective?
Yep.
You're working on population health issues.
Yep.
I'm working on climate change issues. Well, then let's both advocate for planting more trees in disadvantaged neighborhoods, or having more parks, or whatever it is that, accomplishes both of your goals for the same level of effort is what has been really exciting to see.
Absolutely.
All right, so moving into trends now, what key trends or emerging opportunities will shape a workforce that fully integrates SDGs?
Well, I have a slide for that.
She's got a slide.
Of course I do. So a trend is construction. And I was in one of the sessions yesterday, and the construction sector, the building sector, is a huge opportunity to, and in fact, we're not going to get to net zero if we don't fix the way we build things. And we know, the government knows that. There's a national green building strategy, and we see a growing appetite and interest. Again, I can only speak really from the post-secondary sector, but we are the people who train all the tradespeople who build your buildings and who retrofit your buildings and fix your roof after a wind event and install your heat pump. And the interest in greening those skilled trades is really, really high. And I'll give a big shout out to SAIT locally and their green building technologies. And they are award winners in building green technology. And yes, they're sitting right here at the front. But like BCIT is a real leader in this as well. And it is a trend. It is so important that we all get on board with this. And our role in the education sector is to train the plumbers and the electricians and the HVAC installers and the landscapers, so that when they go out to the workforce, they already speak the language. They know what it means. What does embodied carbon mean? What is a carbon footprint? How do you calculate it? And all that. That's super important. Yeah. And it's growing in its importance. And I suspect that it's only going to skyrocket in terms of consumers are a little slower because of the initial upfront cost. But even that is changing now. Even the consumers are realizing that they need to build or retrofit differently. And I've heard in BC, for example, if you want to have a heat pump installed, you could wait a year to get someone to do it for you because they don't have enough tradespeople who know how to do it.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. And I can maybe jump on that for a second, because the workforce development piece is something that we're seeing as a really important piece of this as well, and is really kind of coming to the forefront of the conversation. To your point about waiting a year for a contractor, the folks that know how to do this work are in such high demand that one of the biggest questions that we're seeing asked right now is, how do we train, retrain, retain workers across these various skilled trades that are necessary to do this work? And I think the thing about that is that I think a lot of the conversation often gears towards some of the more obvious things, like we need somebody to build the wind turbines, and we need somebody who's out on offshore rigs where they're kind of transitioning to offshore green
Wind
energy,
stuff,
wind, hydrogen. So those ones tend to be kind of the more obvious. Oh yeah, we need those. But you also need carpenters, you need electricians, you need plumbers, you need people that know how to take those basic skilled trades that we rely on for all of our infrastructure needs, and make sure that they, again, are competent at understanding how their trade fits into the bigger picture. And that doesn't necessarily mean we need a brand new program.
Nope.
It means how do we integrate that into the work that, the apprentice program that these folks are already working through, and how do we encourage people to kind of see themselves in that solution? And that's been a really kind of interesting kind of conversation that we've been seeing happening.
Yeah. And the nice thing is that because you don't always need new programs, it's not as costly as you would think it is. Is you start by embedding the basic competencies into the existing programs. And then, of course, you do need a wind turbine technician, but they often can start with the same education that any electrician would get, and then they specialize in something something else. So yeah, it's not, the barrier is not cost. It's really awareness and competing priorities.
I heard a really fascinating example. I believe it was a pilot somewhere in the Northeast United States where they were basically taking the skilled trades working in the natural gas sector and building on those skills to contribute to like geothermal microgrids, district energy. So, okay, so we need people that can put pipes in the ground. We need people that can drill. We need people that understand how to move small amounts of leaky material from point A to point B, and how do we turn that into a renewable energy solution. And so like that's just like a really kind of like interesting example of how folks are starting to think about this work and how folks are starting to think about the fact that, hey, my trade can be a part of this conversation, and that's really cool. Yeah.
Amazing. All right. We have about 20 minutes left. And what I want to do is I'm going to open, I have more questions, but if you have questions, I think now's the time to start opening the floor up just to make sure we can fit in everyone else's questions. So unless anyone's got a hand shoot up right away, I'm going to, we got one in the back. There we go. Do we have a mic we can share at the back there? Oh, amazing.
Thank you. Great discussion. So I have a question. I mean, we've talked a lot about post-secondary, the post-secondary sector. I was wondering to what extent are the SDGs mainstreamed in K-12 education as well? I have kids in middle school and high school, and I don't remember hearing them talk about that, so I was wondering. And then my second question, so one of my lives in the past, so I worked in academia, and we worked on the national climate change strategy for my home country. And of course, the governance system was very different, and it was more donor-driven. So the motivation was, a lot, including the communications to UNFCCC and all that. And SDGs were very strong. Like, there was a lot of emphasis on that. And moving here, I see a bit of difference. So I was wondering, in your travels, in your work, do you see differences, like interprovincial differences, in terms of circling back to the issue of cost, in terms of leadership, motivation, and all that? Do you see differences, as you work in different provinces?
Well, I guess I'm the one who works in different provinces.
You go for it.
I mean, I won't wade into it too much because it is really political. I will say that the federal government, so the SDGs came about in 2015, and every country at the United Nations ratified the 2030 agenda, it's called, including Prime Minister Stephen Harper. And then, of course, there was an election and there was a change of government, and then the new government really embraced it. So at the federal level, I can say that the SDGs were really integrated into what you called the whole of government approach. So also at the federal level, almost all the ministries were invited to work together on the SDGs. And there is funding from the federal government to do SDG related work. But given the nature of our country, of course, we all know that what the federal government thinks is a priority is very often not echoed in the provinces. So every province, looks at things differently. And I would say that the way that it's worked out is that different provinces prioritize different things, but many of them fit within the SDG framework, but they would be different ones. So some provinces might, still be really focusing on the environmental ones. Other ones might be focusing more on the equity-related ones or the poverty-related ones. But I mean, if you look at some of them, like clean energy, which provinces are really leading? And that changes, right, from year to year. There was, I know that in Alberta, for example, there's a ton of investments in wind and in solar. I know that like Red Deer Polytechnic is, I think you've got some of the provinces, most of the provinces, solar panels for an institutional setting. Right here in Alberta, better than other provinces. So, it really is, I work on a national level, so I can't really speak to what the changes are or the differences, but I will say when I go overseas, I will say that everywhere that I go, they take the SDGs much more seriously than we do in Canada. And it's a real sad situation for me. So in Europe, I'm sure you won't be surprised, in Germany and in the UK and in France, they're really focusing still very heavily on it. Same thing goes for many countries in the global south. They're working really hard on it. So I don't know what the disconnect is in Canada. It doesn't seem to have percolated through our society the way it has in other parts of the world. I guess that would be a collective, answer that we would have to come up with about why that is.
And I think too, sometimes it's about the framing, right? Like just because we're not communicating it in through the lens of, okay, the work that I'm doing touches on SDGs 13, 11, and 5, but we're doing work that touches on SDGs 13, 11, and 5. And so like my work, so again, kind of just like rooting it in some kind of real world examples from my background, I currently work for a department whose primary mandate is around environmental protection and climate action. And so you might have questions, there's sometimes these questions about, okay, well, what does that mean for what, for the intersectionality with, say, like some of the equity work or gender equality, right? And at first glance, maybe those things don't feel super related, but then when you dig into Nova Scotia's climate plan and our environmental goals and climate change reduction act, equity is embedded deeply as an underpinning principle of that plan and has corresponding actions. So for example, Nova Scotia struck a panel investigating environmental racism in the province and tasked that panel with doing a bit of an inquiry into what can Nova Scotia do to respond to and start to mitigate some historic harms that Indigenous and African Nova Scotian populations have experienced in the province, and what does that look like? What does it look like to start to reconcile that? And so that we don't talk about that through the lens of SDGs 13, 11, and 5, but it is deeply connected to that work, and so it's a little bit of a framing issue as well, of maybe internationally other folks are a little bit better at communicating the work that they're doing through the lens of the relevant SDGs.
And you had a question about K-12, and I don't know a lot about the K-12 sector, but I do know that it tends to depend. It's not in the curriculum as far as I know anywhere, but one of my kids came home one day and they had an SDG assignment, so I was like, oh wow, that's so great. So it happens, but I don't think it's consistent across the country as far as I can tell.
Nova Scotia's climate plan, Action 48.1 and 48.2, actually is specifically about sustainable development, environmental education in the K-12 sector. So basically a curriculum evaluation of how we can integrate sustainability education into the K-12 space. So it is happening, probably in pockets, but it's there. Yeah.
It's coming.
Yeah.
That's good. Awesome. Another question, Rich.
That be at a country level?
Would it be at the what level?
Like at the country level?
Yes. Well, it's the EU as an overarching body that does most of the pushing and the legislating and the funding. They have a ton of funding to do this work. So it tends to be at the European Union level that then it's kind of like, imagine they're like Canada with our 13 provinces and territories. So they are a supranational organization with a whole bunch of provinces and territories, some of whom to do stuff, some of whom don't do as much. So each country operationalizes it in their own way. And some of them are absolute leaders in it. And others are, tend to be a little bit behind. But all of them are doing a lot of work in this area.
Whereas hearing...
have full country adoption.
Yep.
At that point, instead of province by province with country.
Well, and that's, I think, one of the barriers, right, is that I think in Canada, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but both early education and advanced education, those curriculums are managed at the province level. Yeah, so.
Yeah. Yep.
I think I saw another question towards middle there.
Hi there. One thing that I found really interesting when you guys were talking about the construction and the trades and just making it more green. I myself come from a construction background, and I know that there can be a stigma, boots on the ground. You got all those old school guys and stuff, and as soon as they hear climate change or anything like that, it's just like you're a hippie or whatever the case is, right? So throughout my career, I've actually had the opportunity to now work in renewables and I am actually the environmental lead on my site. So I have the opportunity to try to create that culture, and I'm kind of the first point of contact when it comes to orientations and stuff like that for everybody that comes to our site. So one thing that I do see is, there's a lot of guys in the field there. You see their eyes kind of get bright when you start talking about the different species that are going to be in the area, or, you're just talking about the environment and you're just giving them that information and fun facts. But to take it to a deeper level, I'm just wondering what kind of information or, sorry, I wrote this down, just information on opportunities and stuff for being greener, say, for example, in their field, I guess, just like how would I communicate that more to them, or give them more access to information, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, that's what we've developed these training modules that are freely available. And maybe if you come up, I can write down the website, or actually you can all write it down. It's called impactclimate.ca. And if you go to impactclimate.ca under resources, you'll find under that tab, it'll say faculty training modules. What that is professional development for people in the trades. And a couple of days ago, I was hosted at SAIT, and I had the same fear. I was saying to my colleagues, I'm not, this woman from Ottawa, and I'm like, I don't even know the difference, like I'm exaggerating, but between a wrench and a screwdriver, and I'm going to stand in front of these guys and try to say something. But honestly, it was amazing. They were so receptive. A group of trades instructors, really, really receptive. And I've heard through other similar presentations that the faculty, who tend to be older, obviously once you're teaching, you've been in the trade for 20, 30, 40 years, you didn't learn that stuff. It's not their fault that they didn't learn that stuff. Nobody was teaching that. But the young folks coming into their programs now are asking them stuff. Like they'll have a young man or young woman come into the carpentry program and start talking about embodied carbon, and they're like, I had no idea what that is. It's not their fault they have no idea. So we're trying to upskill them with this material, but it's all freely available. It's an open educational resource. You can download the entire module. You can adapt it to your own training needs. So you could have a look at what's in there, and you can cherry pick a few chapters and a couple of videos, and you can use that in your training. And the thing that makes it really credible is that it was created by faculty that teach the trades. So it wasn't created by me and a bunch of people in Ottawa. It was created by instructors in carpentry, HVAC, electrical, and landscaping. Develop those modules, and so they know what is important and what's relevant. So just go ahead and use that information. But I will say another really exciting, which is why I said this green building is a trend, is the Canadian or Canada's building trades unions. There's a collective of the trade unions for the building trades. They have a massive project called Building It Green. You could Google it. Building It Green by CBTU, and they have been training journey people and for people on construction sites around greening of the trades. They have amazing materials, and they are more than likely, if you're working on a site, they will give you access to amazing materials that they've designed for apprentices and journey people and for people working on sites. And if it's coming from their union, it's also kind of more credible, right, than coming from people perceived as outside of their sector, and kind of people that are perceived as being the ones who are protesting the work that they do. But really, it's about now having to collaborate.
Yeah, that's kind of that's a perfect segue into what I was going to jump in with here, is that who is delivering that message is really important, right? If it's coming from a trusted peer or colleague, and you have somebody kind of who is respected by these individuals, who can help to communicate that message and help to build that buy-in and excitement about this shift in direction, that's going to be really important in terms of how that message is received, right? Like the old dude that's been in the industry for 50 years is not going to want to listen to me come in and talk to him about embodied carbon and like new insulation techniques, right? That's not going to be received well. But if you have a trusted peer partner on the ground who can help you champion that and deliver that message in a way that it's going to be heard, that's going to be really important.
Yep.
I'm going to jump in on this one because I've been the editor of magazines in the construction and infrastructure space for many, many years. Yeah. So I know in my career, even 15, 20 years ago, we were already talking about green building and infrastructure then. But then it was this novel idea. So I would say at this point, you will see the large construction firms, the Ellis Dons, the PCLs, like these are the ones that are building your large public infrastructure. They've got it. They're not maybe doing it 100% yet, but they have people, they have the materials, and they are starting to make the difference. I would say it is the small and medium-sized company. You get some really innovative, smaller companies that will start in this realm as well. But it's the big ones. And once the big ones go, because they're working with municipalities, because they're the ones, municipalities are still looking at most projects on, what's the cheapest they can do things a lot of the time, right? So still green building is still more expensive, but it's closer. I think you mentioned early on that parity is coming. But I think I'm thinking like for the construction industry, it reminds me of women in construction. The percentages, they grow inch by inch every year. And I would say the same things happened with green building as well. But the difference now is that there is more demand from consumers, people who are buying a condo, for example. They want charging stations for their hybrid vehicles and their electric vehicles. They want the materials. They want to know that the building envelope is safer and more, their utility bills are far lower. Yeah. So it's coming with demand, but it's still just like all of this. But as I say, it's a very good analogy for exactly what we're talking about with SDGs, because it's been there. We've been talking about it forever. I feel like that and skilled labor are the two conversations that I've been having for 20 years, and there is progress, but it is just not as quick as I think we'd like to see.
And how do you reach those kind of small sole proprietor home builders, right, that have been doing things their own way for a really long time, right?
Well, the way that you reach them, and sorry for the shameless plug, is that they could go and get upskilled at their local college, right? Yes. So the colleges are offering these green building technology programs, like check it out at SAIT if you live here, but they have them, in most colleges have opportunities for short upskilling programs. And so I challenge our colleges to offer more of those, but also these independent contractors and small companies, take the time to come and upskill on something. And why will they do that? Well, if the clients are asking for it. So, and then the clients is all of us. So hopefully all of us, if we're ever in doing a renovation, we're gonna be asking for those things, and we're gonna be looking for the contractor that can put in the solar panel or the low flush toilets or the different walls or that. So everybody has a role. And that's the thing with the SDGs, is that it's not up to governments, frankly, to make them happen. And it's not up to corporations to make them happen. At the end of the day, consumers and voters are the people. Like, we have to vote for the right people, and we have to vote with our dollars. And if we are also going to say, like to the gentleman's point, well, I need to do the cheapest thing right now, I can't be worried about my utility bills in 5 years. Well, okay, then we can wring our hands and be mad that nobody's doing that work. We need to also put our money where our mouth is.
And to your point about governments not being like the be-all, end-all of this problem, I think the regulatory environment also moves very slow for any number of reasons. I won't get into them because I want to be able to have somebody ask another question. But like, as an example, it took Nova Scotia till end of 2024 to announce a plan to adopt the 2020 Building and Energy Codes, right? And so that's not necessarily going to be a timely solution to this problem. Yeah. It's always a little bit behind.
Yeah. Although the new building codes are going to make a huge difference too, once everybody gets on board with it.
All right, let's take one more question right at the back here before we...
I'm very happy to hear that these things are finally progressing, because I've been in this area for a very long time. And like in 2009, I started working for a company called Integrated Designs in Saskatoon, and we were one of the only companies in Canada doing commissioning, energy auditing, energy modeling, these types of services. And I actually, like what you just said about it has to come from consumers, I started a company to try and create that awareness and create like a hub for the people that already knew this stuff. And it was like, I fell flat on my face at that time. But like what you also said about these large companies finally getting on board, you wouldn't believe how much of a struggle it was at that time to try and get them to like, hey, you guys, look at these LEED programs. You should put all your professionals through this LEED training so that they understand this. Oh, look, here's the Passive House certification. Like, if everybody took this, like if you really want to understand how long this has taken, In 1979, the Saskatchewan Conservation House was built in Regina. And well, it was built in 1977, but in 1979, they published their data and said, oh, look, we can build a house that uses 90% less energy than a conventional house built today. That was 45 years ago.
Yeah.
Like, that's a very long time. Imagine if people would have, if it would have taken people to say, oh, we need to do this right now. Like, imagine if in the 80s, every building was at least 50% better than what was done then.
Yeah.
Where would we be today? We need to accelerate this. Like, it's taken way too long to get to this point.
Well, I love that you're saying that, because the topic of this workshop was increasing ambition, and so I think that is a perfect, ending to this.
It's perfect.
Yeah.
All right, so I'm going to have one last question for you both, and I'll give you a minute or two each just to respond. So what advice do you have for professionals who want to integrate SDGs into their work, but maybe don't have direct sustainability responsibilities in their role? So any one of us, what could we do, take back today? What advice do you have?
Oh my gosh, I mean, I think honestly, if you look at the SDGs, just look at the 17 and go, which one is closest to my current role? And then say, okay, all right, so I'm focusing on, whatever it is. I mean, in this crowd, most of you are doing something environmental, but, whatever it is, and then think about in your workplace, like the examples we gave earlier, like if you're partnering with the health department, well, you can use the SDGs as your opening frame, like, hey, did you know about these? Did you know that Canada signed on to this? Did you know that, we could work together? Here's an example. We have this thing called the SDG Toolkit online. It is a toolkit that was developed with case studies of what colleges and institutes across Canada are doing. And if you just Google SDG Toolkit colleges, you'll find it. And it's got about 50 different case studies. And I'm sure that every one of you would find one thing in there that you like. There's stuff for finance and administration people. There's stuff for obviously facilities. There's stuff for academic programs in the case of education. There's stuff for partnerships. There's stuff for international programs. And you'll find an example of a case study of how they've done something. And I'm sure most of them are transferable to any other employer situation.
Yeah, I mean, we're at the end of the session, so I don't think I have time to get on my every job is a climate job soapbox, but maybe we can come back to that in another day. I guess what I would say is be curious and ask the question, right? Just because your job doesn't have climate or environment or sustainability in the title doesn't mean that you can't have a significant impact. And so I guess I would suggest it's really the onus is on everybody as an individual is to kind of start to explore that for themselves. The SDG Academy through the training arm of the UN Sustainable Development Network. I might be getting the acronym wrong, forgive me. They have a really fantastic selection of online self-paced modules on every topic imaginable about the SDGs and how to start to think about how it looks to implement them, how it looks to measure them, how it looks to kind of bring them together. I know there's one that I looked at recently that was about measuring success, measuring outcomes around SDGs, and it was was a really cool starting point to think about. So how do I get started measuring SDGs within my organization? What kind of data do I need? What types of actions should I prioritize? Some of those questions that folks can be asking themselves to start to think about what it looks like to integrate those 17 goals into whatever it is the work that you're doing. And I thought that was really important to be as a starting point.
Fantastic. Wow, it's very clear to me we still have a bit of a ways to go, but we're making some progress. And it's also clear that embedding the SDGs isn't just about policy, it's also about action in every role and industry. Today we explored how systems, thinking, collaboration, capacity building make sustainability a reality. So what is the key takeaway? I think everyone has a role. Everybody has a role to play, whether in education, government, business. Aligning with your work with SDGs drives innovation, resilience, and long-term value. And I think we'll be able to make that case for the powers that be to really bring it in. So thank you to our speakers. Let's give them a round of applause.